Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to The Question. The Question is a live, collaborative learning show committed to broadening your perspective on design systems. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, founder of Sparkbox and Redwood's design system community, and you're listening to the episode 076 Deep Dive with ToniAnn Drenckhahn, where we're talking about enabling craft through a design system. If you have a moment, please get subscribed to the show out at bencallahan.com/thequestion. Let's get into it. ToniAnn, will you tell us, I'm just curious specifically, like what led you to this topic of craft in systems? Like what's happening in your world right now that this was top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think so. I just joined Etsy a month in, but before that, I was at BetMGM, and we were talking a lot about and focusing on the foundational parts of what our app looks like and what it feels like, and the role that design systems and modularity and primitive components actually play in helping to codify those things so that we can scale them out. I think AI comes in this. You get a little bit of pressure now. What are people actually producing? How do we define craft? What does that look like? Who holds the keys? And I think this question is also coming up across my teams at Etsy as we look to figure out how we scale out impact, how we really level up the craft of the end product that we're actually creating. And I was talking to some people in Redwoods as well, and I think this pressure for craft and the role that design systems plays in scaling that out, or like in some anxiety cases, kind of trying to prevent bad craft from going out the door, seems like it's coming back into the picture a lot with teams. I think this was like early on design systems started to talk about this, and it was more so in a policing type of way long time ago. I feel like we somewhere in the middle kind of got into let product teams do their thing, like we are just here to enable. And I feel like now it's coming back into the picture where this is more and more what systems teams are talking about.
Amazing. And this topic came up, I feel like it's come up in a handful of other episodes. You called that out. But even just recently, we had an episode where we just asked you to define craft. And so in the question this week, we gave sort of a very, very simple definition. We said, for this conversation, we're thinking of craft as the skill needed to deliver high quality digital products. And we asked 4 questions this week. So the first of those was, how should a design system team enable craft in their organizations? And you could choose one: teach, encode, both roughly equally, or you could say it's not our job to do this. And then, of course, we always give an NA or an other option in these. The second question was, which specific mechanisms has your team used to enable craft? And you could choose as many of these as you'd like. We gave you the choices of critiques with explicit quality criteria, UX or principles-based training, reference apps or North Star design examples, opinionated components that limit off-brand choices, polished templates or starter kits, quality gates or sign-off processes, pairing design system folks with product teams, or you could say we haven't used any of these systematically, or of course, NA or other. And then question 3 was, where does the craft gap in your organization come from? And you could choose all, or as many of these as apply. Hiring, AI tools reducing the incentive to develop craft skills, the system team expected to enable craft without the authority to enforce it, no shared definition of what craft means, speed pressure, leaving no time for refinement, or craft has never been a priority, and then NA or other. And then the last question was an open text, and we just asked you, if you could instantly give your design system or product organization one thing to increase craft, what would it be? So many great answers. And I tried to kind of capture a lot of the all those more quantitative questions down below. We did send this out to 1,105 design system practitioners. We got 64 responses. And as always, wherever you're watching or listening, you can click this link to see the raw data yourself and do your own analysis. Each time we do these episodes now, I've started this thing where I'm trying to sort of like state kind of the way that the answers felt to me, like a little bit more just like, what was the vibe of the answers? And so this week I had this idea of like accumulated realism was the best I could do to state it. And I think it felt to me like in reading the answers, like we all know this is a problem. In fact, one of the things that really stood out was, sorry if I'm making you sick by zooming around here, but this question of where does the craft gap in your org come from? And the answer, the top one was, we don't have one. Nobody said that, right? Which means every single one of you acknowledges that there's a gap in craft in the organization. And I don't think we've ever had a case where like zero responses have been chosen. So that's huge, right? And so I think we know it's a problem. And actually, if you read the answers, like we know how to solve this. Like there's lots of great solutions. It's just we don't have the time or we don't have the authority. And it's almost like it's sort of just this like we're just kind of like accepting that reality. So that's a tough place to be, I think. ToniAnn, how does that sit with you? Did you see this sort of similar sentiment in the answers?
Yeah, and I think time was one of the ones that was like, you really feel that in your soul when everyone's like, we don't have the time. This is really important. We care about this as designers, as engineers, as people who are working on systems at scale, but not feeling like we have the time, or maybe sometimes it's the time or the focus, the
Mhm.
attention to be able
Yeah.
to actually do these things. Um, it started just get me thinking around, I don't know if advocating for the time is the only successful way to get this, right?
Yeah.
But then like how do you find small moments where craft doesn't feel so overarching and so overwhelming to tackle, where you can take like bite-sized chunks out of that craft discussion and that conversation and still deliver it even when time is scarce?
Yeah, it's tough to do, and it comes down to just culture and like what the organization values, and everybody says they value quality, but when you have to choose between that and moving quickly, a lot of times that where people go. So, um, most folks thought in that first question, the more quantitative first question around how should we do this, we kind of kind of gave you the options of like teaching. In other words, like we're going to like train up raise the skills of the individuals versus encoding. Like we're going to bake high quality crafted components for folks to use. And everybody generally, most folks, I think it was 72% chose both of those are needed, right? So I think overwhelmingly we feel like we would say some combination of those. Um, and then the next two, which mechanisms are folks using? 67% of us, opinionated components. And in my mind, that is encoding, right? Like that's saying we're trying to encode craft into these things. But 50% on these three, pairing, critiques, and reference examples, which all to me feel more educational. So it's kind of cool to see that we are trying to kind of balance this to a certain extent. And then that last one, where does the gap come from? 70% said no definition or speed pressure, basically around 70% for both of these, right? So lack of clarity, lack of alignment on what it even means, like what are we trying to accomplish? And then even if we do know what it is, we don't have the time to do it. So it's no wonder that it's something that feels pervasive. Okay, this is the part of the conversation where you get to jump in. So green check marks for new topics. And once we've got a thread started, raise your hand in Zoom to join in that thread of the conversation. Okay, ToniAnn, where do you want us to start?
Yeah. So I really liked this floor ceiling framework, and I think that there's a lot to it. There's a lot of complexity when we talk about how design systems is postured in organizations to enable craft and what that actually looks like. And I think this gets at like, do we have the authority? Do we have the shared definition? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I am curious, like how this type of floor ceiling framework resonates or doesn't with people that might be figuring out where the design systems team should lean in
Mhm.
and where we should start changing the narrative about like using the design system because it's expected or it's mandatory, as opposed to the design system becomes our shared definition of what baseline craft actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. This little diagram came as a result of just like reading through all of these things, and I started to see this pattern that like, hey, we can raise the floor of craft by just making good components for folks to use. But the ceiling feels to me like it's set by how the system is actually implemented, right? The choices that our consuming product teams make with the things we give them. And so that leaves this sort of like space between, right, where we can kind of raise the floor, but they have to raise the ceiling. And I think over time, that's maybe like how this happens, right? We raise the floor, they use the stuff. If they use it well, they're raising the ceiling. We see that and we encode that back into the system, which raises the floor again, you know? So over time, we could see this be sort of like a nice gradual improvement of quality across all the products. But this feels very theoretical. And so I'm with you, Tony, and I'd love to hear folks if this resonates or not. Mike, jump in, buddy.
Yeah, I'd love to go into the consumers setting the quality ceiling a bit more. If you could, I'm not sure if I quite follow. So, are you saying that when seeing the design system patterns in practice, um, you know, designers and adopters get a sense for if things are working well together, or is it more um, the designer, like how the adopters are using your components is what sets that quality ceiling?
Yeah, I guess that I was imagining that it was more about how they use it. In other words, like I could take a great design system and make absolute crap with it, right? So it's like the choices they make with the things we give them are where like the sort of like top level of this thing can be. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does, yeah. No, it very much resonates.
Yeah.
We've got adopters, to your point, right? We've got adopters that create these beautiful, lovely, usable layouts with our components, and then we've got others that just maybe don't have the same sense for spacing and hierarchy, right? And it's very that's kind of why I asked, because it's so interesting to see uh, such a wide gap in quality with using the very same components.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a great indicator that this exists, right? Thanks, Mike. Um, Others, how does this sort of like framing feel to you? Does this something that resonates with your current scenario, or do you think of it differently? Jump right in. Go ahead, Janesa. Go ahead.
Hi, Ben.
Hey.
Yeah, it definitely resonates with me. I think um that one of my answers was that, roughly both like having that at the component level of making sure that we're building out the component in a way that is opinionated so that it could help guide our consumers um in a better direction, I guess, when using components. But there's also this piece to it of like educating our own consumers to making sure, yes, they're using it correctly, but also knowing like how to properly, I guess, in a sense, like make product decisions too.
Mm-hmm.
That trying to pull in an example over here of like when using a component and requesting a deviation or a variant, for example, kind of like educating them through that process of like, have you really done the investigative work here to understand what it means what you're requesting, right? Is it really necessary to add that variant? Have you explored every other variant and really justified that none of those variants currently work?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really that educational piece. So as much as like you can build out a very nice opinionated component, I think there's always going to be that piece of like educating your consumers and having them understand what it means to um, really use a component versus like requesting different contributions.
Janessa, have you had success with any specific educational techniques? Like what's worked or not worked for you?
Good question. I think it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
I think what I've been doing has been educating our designers in our like support channel, kind of like walking them through the steps of like really the contribution process itself to educate them on what is necessary to essentially request a variant. I think in some cases it has been successful. Ultimately, it's like, the product designer's willingness to learn and understand what that process is versus kind of just being like, oh, like this is
Yeah.
a one-time use case. I don't really want to think about it on a system level, like really trying to handhold a little bit here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because somebody can't learn something they think they already know. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
like if they, so there's like that problem of just like it's just like the way they're approaching the system and the system team and like sort of like how they see you as a team. So that's really
Mhm.
tough to shift. But thanks for the input, Jess. Thank you. Ilya, what's up?
Thanks. Yeah, this is great. I feel the pain about the education aspect and have found some success in, as much as possible, going away from the atomic design Brad Frost sort of world and really diving into views and components and leaning into the floor plan quality of views as a driver for componentizing and outsourcing education. And so I think as much as we can, from the design system side, like really embrace and fall in love with the front end tech stack, and just really embrace and fall in love with business logic and content symphony, I think we can really help lean on views and floor plans instead of really like educating about things like that are written in the green box, which are really hard to talk about.
Yeah. Say more about what you mean by views and floor plans.
So how the components live and come to life, information architecture, a lot of the things that the folks have brought up so far, including everything here in the FigJam, I think we can systematize and just, bake into the front end and label the way that the way that it works. So if there's, if there's a growth, a growth set of rules that tend to work for the vertical or your industry that you're in, I'm in healthcare, everyone's in different verticals here, then I'm sure different ways of presenting, whether it's mobile forward or others, and having information architecture be a part of, be something that's highly reference, highly referable to.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Ilya. ToniAnn, jump in.
Yeah, I think I really like this using floor plans, like framing of this too, because I think I spent a lot of time doing this really early on in design systems where like it was like pairing with consumers and co-designing screens with them, co-designing templates, like really setting the vision for a product that like I didn't own, I wasn't close to, right? And trying to figure out how you articulate that. And so I am curious to hear from more people who might be spending time doing that, or if you're not spending time doing that, how that sort of impacts the education at large.
Yeah.
Because I think you do have to have a really strong vision and not a component vision, right? It has to be, how does this come to life kind of vision.
Yeah, that's good. Shaun, jump in.
I was looking at this diagram earlier, and I guess I spoke a little bit with ToniAnn about it, and my reflection when looking at it was the kind of quality ceiling and how much the culture of the organization or even the kind of department that a consumer is a part of impacts that quality ceiling, almost to the point where it doesn't really, like Jesse, like you were talking about education, and it doesn't even matter how much education you do, like the culture almost overrides that.
Yeah.
And I think it can really often come down to the leaders that are in charge of some departments, and they set the agenda, they set the approach for their department. And I've worked with departments who their leaders are maybe a little bit more focused on like empire building, and they want to do their own thing, and they're happy for teams to kind of go off and do what they want, and their idea of kind of quality and craft is maybe slightly different. They're maybe happy for there to be some inconsistency.
Yeah.
Versus maybe some other teams where maybe they've got more of a holistic, bigger picture view, where maybe it feels a little bit easier to get them to think about craft.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it does, in a sense, come down to just like what the leadership cares about. So if you don't have leaders that care about this stuff, it's gonna be really hard to put any of this into practice. Lauren, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, building on that, I think it's a blessing and a curse that for the last year I've operated in cultures that care deeply about craft. And the way I've navigated that from a systems perspective is to really anchor in on our team being like the beacon of craft. And so what that's looked like is hiring a more diverse skill set on my team to include visual designers that have like a systems mindset. So they can then kind of satellite or embed into product teams, raise the craft collaboratively, find those people that are always going to be pushing outside of the system and kind of like figure out the path forward together. and then being able to bring it back to the team. I think that like before I had that skill set on my team, the feedback loop was too big and it would create kind of like an us versus them scenario where like, oh no, but we have this roadmap and they're deviating. And it's like, how do we reconcile that? And by having kind of the visual design muscle on the team and having like the most visually minded people in our org aligned with that person, it seems like we're able to move together with the consuming teams much quicker.
What did you mean by the feedback loop was too big?
Yeah. So, for example, we'll have like a team that's deviating because we lack a robust set of color tokens for data viz. And then it's like, well, our team is really focused on typography right now. We don't have time to focus on that. So they're like, okay, we're just going to unblock ourselves and go after that.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's someone that's able to like close that loop and pair with them quickly, they can bring it back into the system much a lot faster because we're like kind of giving them space in the roadmap to find those things and bring them back quickly and not like waiting another quarter until we have time to resolve those data colors.
Oh, I see. That's awesome. Yeah. So just like being where they are almost like makes that such a tighter loop. Yeah.
A little bit like time too is a constraint there, right? 'Cause time and the amount of, even with a person who's focused on visual design, they were doing something else and not what your consumers need. So there might also be like maybe a roadmap art to aligning this conversation.
Yeah, the way I've been narrowing that too is like the place I work now and the place I worked before, we're pretty dependent on a launch calendar. So there was a clear prioritized list of feature teams that needed the most attention that were like maybe going to be the highest craft experiences in the product. And I was like, okay, their needs are prioritized above other needs. And so that helped kind of narrow the time or like attention that we gave.
Nice. Okay, last comment on this thread, and then we'll go to Greg's new thread here. Jesse, what's up?
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything that's not obvious, but like the tactical, like the blue stuff is quick. It's tactical. You can support that. You know, it's discrete. It's measurable. The green stuff is really squishy. It's really baked into trust. Like I have a hard time joining a new team and there's talk of culture. It's like what I call like craft is like authenticity. It's like signature, right? Like that's how I relate it to. It's like the voice of a team. That's gonna take time to like make for everybody to do it, you know, instinctively, and for people to share that and say this is ours, right? Our culture.
Yeah.
So I guess being realistic, you know, and like if your team turns over a lot, stay in the blue. If you have old timers who are sticking around and you got this team that's like, you know, is going to be there, then lean into the green. But like be realistic with who your team is and where they are, basically.
Yeah, that's fair, Jesse. That's good. And also, I mean, like building that sort of culture, it's like long-term stuff. You know, that's not stuff that happens just overnight. And it's honestly really hard for a team, like a single team, to be able to do that. That's like organization wide, you know, so it's tough stuff. But thanks for the input. Okay, where'd Greg go? Let's see. You got a new thread for us, buddy, yeah?
I guess sort of. I don't know. I got lost in all the other the stuff, so I don't know how much it connects. But I wanted to kind of talk about like, you know, like state of your system too will impact things, right? So like, as I was hearing people talk about things like the levels and the floor plans and things like that.
Yeah.
It made me think about you know, when you are in the fortunate place of adoption is pretty good, but the maturity of the system maybe isn't as mature. So you've got a lot of components, but you haven't told people how to put them together in patterns or recipes or whatever you want, or page templates, or done work around that you've translated into consumable, you know, documentation or standards or anything like that. Then you get yourself in this interesting place where in order to document those things, now you have to go out and see what's been done where I work, I don't even know how many products we have, because it's beyond, like, we have a core set of like main products, but we have all sorts of stuff. So we've got a system supporting many different products. Some of them have very different end users than others. So there's a big wide range. And so when we have certain patterns, we have to go out and we want to create new documentation or new standards. We have to go source everything from everybody and get those things together. And then they're bringing those examples. We're bringing the systems thinking. And then we have to combine those two things. We can't just come up with the pattern and tell them what it is.
Yeah.
We have to find out, well, in this product, you kind of need this and this.
Yeah.
And then we can synthesize it down to like 2 or 3 different variations of a pattern or something.
Sure.
Not necessarily, hey, we've got one way to do it and everyone has to do it, or else you're off, you're off book and your craft sucks or something,
Yeah.
So
I like that, Greg. It sort of connects to this other little sort of short diagram, which was like the order of ops kind of stuff. Like if you just start by just offering stuff, right, which is kind of like the opposite of what I hear you describing, then all you get to do is observe the outcomes, which are probably going to be inconsistent and not solving needs. And so, because you don't have a shared target, right? So if you pause at the beginning to sort of like define what the heck do we actually mean by quality and craft, and what do these teams really need, then you can offer the right stuff that actually achieve their things, and now you're going to meet those quality goals. So it's like flipping the order of things a little bit, so.
And what's interesting too, now that we've got all the AI stuff coming into play, is like, in some ways there might be opportunities to like use AI and different automations to like get your hands deep into those products and hunt for those things that you're looking for, instead of having to go to people and go, hey, do you have some free time to tell me some info, and drag that out of them. So some opportunity there maybe.
Nice. Yeah, thanks. ToniAnn, how's all this sitting with you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, even to that point around like the design system order of operations. And there is going to be a limit if you're only offering the basics of a design system, right? And it's probably also the limit of like, this is where people start to think, well, design systems limit creativity, because what you're offering is pretty basic. It's supposed to be the floor. And I think if you haven't yet defined that quality and really set that vision of what the ceiling is collaboratively with your teams, it's going to feel like a boring design system that you can do boring things with. But I'm curious if anyone's in this. It's never this linear, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when you've been in an org that followed that first path, and now you really need to level set and define quality while you're in the middle of this like observing outcomes, no shared target, shifting where you need to go. And how do you shift your consumers to now have a shared definition of quality and deal with the impact that's going to have on them? It's going to change some of the products somewhere, right?
Yeah. So who here has done some kind of a workshop or something with consuming teams to sort of like more clearly articulate craft quality goals? Has anybody had success running that sort of kind of collaborative discovery type work around quality?
Or even vision.
Yeah, or vision. Yeah, any of that.
Vision is a great time. I think, we did this at BetMGM when we level set on vision and what that looks like. Part of the hardship is staying out of the way, because it's blue sky and you don't want to be limiting and go, that's not really going to work in the system. But I think if you're not in that conversation, there's a bar of craft and quality that's being set without the systems team. And then you're put into a place where you just have to deliver on whatever they're saying to deliver on, even if it doesn't make sense for a system.
Yeah.
Curious what vision even looks like in some of these teams.
Yeah, for sure. Ilya, jump in.
I think with, in my experience, running kind of things like this across multidisciplinary places, Microsoft was a big one, because that was a lot of folks doing the co-pilot before we shipped the thing that's became known as co-pilot. Apologies for that. But the many things to say there. I think in addition to all the soul searching that you mentioned, the defining whether the consuming team is inventing or if their core technology was one big piece. If there's a lot of invention happening, I think that makes sense with everything you said in terms of not limiting innovation. But there is tend to be, both in terms of product or project or the purpose of the thing existing. Is it meant to be R&D, or is it meant to be keeping the lights on as far as where it is in the business? And then using some of both the invention patterns and the core tech patterns and defining them and kind of saving them for later, so that others can pull off the shelf as they deem fit. I would add just maybe one more layer above the green quality of ceiling is maybe the quality of like what consumers, people in the world who use our experiences tell us. In some cases, they have expectations that would maybe even define that, actual, define the end customer. And that would be, people who are just used to the infinity pool of a TikTok, or they already have life experiences that enthuse or delight them. And so that bar can be even higher than anybody in the company could have imagined, which is pretty healthy, right?
Yeah, that's a great call out. Thank you. Robin.
Yeah, regarding the quality ceiling definition, I was thinking like some years ago we tried to redefine the principles of the branding principles of the company, and I remember that one issue with the word quality that we had was that across departments there were very different opinions of what quality means. And so that was always a challenge in like trying to synthesize this word quality, because it was very subjective oftentimes. And maybe even when you agree on something, like you might have an external agency that comes in and tells you that quality is now something else. And so like I always had that I find it always challenging to consolidate this, because quality, when you talk across many teams, it's very, very subjective and it can be very different. So there was always a bit of a challenge to synthesize and agree on what do we mean as quality. Maybe in one team it's easier, but like maybe across departments it's much harder.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's totally true. It's a good point, Robin. Caroline, what's up? How are you?
Good. How are you? So to bounce off of both like what Robin was saying and like the customer expectations. So we also did a survey of our customers of what they felt like quality, or specifically we're kind of using the word delight in those moments and trying to rectify how we defined what quality and delight were internally versus what customers were thinking. And for customers, it had nothing to do with what we thought quality or craft was. It was how quickly can they get in and out of our system? How much can we do automated for them? It had nothing to do with animations and color and all of the design pieces that come into what we think of quality and craft. It has to do with their experience in the product itself. And I think that's really hard to rectify with people who are building, who really want to pull in some of these like really fun, fancy animations and things like that. It's like, well, is that really pushing the needle on the customer side of things? Or is that just for you to be able to try to experiment? It can be both, or you can like still stress on the like you part of it, but like understand that at least it's not hindering the customer experience in terms of getting things done. Because like, with animations, it could slow things down, and people don't want to be slowed down. They just want to get in and out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're saying you actually talked to customers about this stuff, and the stuff they reported back was very different than what you expected it to be or wanted it to be, maybe as designers and engineers.
Well, I mean, to be fair, from a systems perspective, we had a feeling that was going to be their answers, but we were doing our due justice for everyone else who thought the opposite way.
Got you. Yeah. That's a great case study, Caroline. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, new topic, Donnie. What you got?
It might not be a new topic because it might have wrapped around
That's
to
okay.
the same topic, in fact, because the thing that when I saw the question, and also part of the things that we've been talking about, I have this preconceived definition of what I thought craft was.
Okay.
And in the conversation that we've been having here, I feel like there's the craft that I'm thinking about, and because we're also saying about quality as well, I think craft and quality are effectively very similar but different, because where I'm saying craft ends up being very subjective, but quality becoming very objective. So basically saying that, you know, a button should have a readable label. That's objective quality, right? Like that's, you know, this thing that if we don't have a readable label, then it's bad quality, like just kind of like period. Meanwhile, if the button has a border radius on it that's really nice and whatever, you know, that's I'm feeling like the craft side, subjective. Like I want, you know, to feel something looking at this button. So that's the thing that I'm like trying to disambiguate in this stuff, where like I certainly want a high quality thing to be out there in the world for people to use. But when it comes to the subjective craft of it, I don't really have a lot of opinion about the border radius, as an example, or
Yeah.
the color that's being provided, right? If there's someone else out there that has an opinion about it, great, go ahead and have a good time. And the design system should, you know, empower people to provide that level of subjective kind of like feeling or expression. But from a like a yeah, from a objective, like it should work like this, which we have best practices for. That's where I like to focus more of my attention, which is like why the question about craft I was kind of like unprepared for, but for quality, if I think about it as
Yeah.
quality, I'm like, oh, okay, I can answer these questions now.
Yeah. It's interesting because Robin, I want to put you back on the spot because you said you tried to come up with an objective definition of quality, but even that was hard. And that maybe is a counterpoint to what Donnie's saying here. Can you respond or?
Yeah, no, I love the fact that Don is trying to split this too, because it's totally true. There are, and what I remember in this principle, we were trying to focus on the quality, like, responsiveness, accessibility, that were the things, because like Donnie said, like the radius, that's a more crafty thing, that is totally subjective. So I think it's actually very useful to split the two, because no, like for quality stuff, there is no argument. It's like the things that are obvious and you can objectively prove this is quality.
Yeah.
But oftentimes I think we mix the two, and I think it's healthy maybe to split the two.
Yeah. I mean, your example, Donnie, of a button has to have a readable label. I mean, I think you and I are aligned in our values, and I agree that that is a necessary part of a high quality interface. But I could also see a scenario where somebody who's driven more by the business metrics of an application doesn't give a shit about that and is like, can the majority of people check out and buy the jeans on my website, you know, or whatever it is they're selling, you know? And so even that to me becomes less objective when we spread this across different parts of the organization with very different goals. So I don't know how you would respond to that, but that's just where my mind keeps going, is like, none of this is actually as objective as we want it to be.
I don't know about that in particular. I mean, I wrote about something called this, design attractors, which are meant to describe like fundamental kind of quality metrics, really, that say this is going to objectively be the best button, right? Putting a label internally with an ARIA label or some other way of doing it is going to make it a better button, you know, no matter what. So even if that business level person who doesn't see the label wants to have an icon button, et cetera, like we could still provide them a quality button without the visual label. It could totally work that way. But
Yeah.
there's a part of the craft that's coming in there, the subjective part that's saying, I don't like labels, so I don't want that. You know, we're almost going into the territory of hyper-personalization at that point, which I'm going to pause on. But
Yeah.
ultimately, there is an objectives thing that says the best button looks like this. Meanwhile, people will have subjective feelings about the look and feel of that button, but we could still have a core structure behind it that is the best practice that we found through the 20 years plus
Yeah.
that we figured out doing this stuff.
Yeah. And maybe the ideal here is just, as an organization, we just have to agree on what this is for us in our context. Right. So,
Right.
yeah. Nice. Okay. ToniAnn, what's going on? How you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point, because as you were talking about, like, the button has to have a label, I'm going, oh, that's not really a quality button. That's a functional button, right? Like that's the that's the subfloor underneath the floor that you want to set as a design team. And so it started to bring some thoughts into mind and beg a question around, like, will you hire a design team because you want a quality high quality looking product, right? You hire a really robust design team with certain set of skill sets, or you hire a really small design team because you're trying to say, oh, quality is not something we're really going to pay for. We are prioritizing business metrics, but we still need it to be designed, right? It's kind of like, is design at the forefront of like what is truly the for, and how design actually plays a part in that. Because I think most of designers, and Shaun mentioned this in the chat around like craft for design systems does look different than craft for product and feature teams. I think that's because our literal craft is different. Our skill sets are different. What we care about is different. What we invest in is different. But we might all have a shared definition of what a quality product looks like, feels like, acts like. I think we'd all agree it's accessible, it's functional, it's readable. And maybe finding those common grounds is something that we have to start doing as well in order to say, all right, we actually all do agree on a floor here. And this is where we as a design group represent the floor. Now, what's the next layer up? It's not just a readable button. It does have to feel like it, I don't know, conveys brand, is beautiful, is expressive.
Yeah.
And then you can split hairs on what the corner radius to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. One other quick thought that I have, or question, I guess, to pose to the community is there a risk in, so I tried to sort of phrase this down here, and this just kind of, I was like looking at one of the answers in particular was this statement. Encoding has its benefits, meaning encoding like craft or quality into the components of a system. Encoding has its benefits, but it's like bumper rails in bowling, meaning that you have no incentive to learn or get better if they're always there to lean on. And I just started thinking about like, what is the impact of this, right? Like if we're baking like strong opinions of quality into components, which I believe we should be doing, are we also removing the onus of consuming teams to have to understand how to build those things with quality? So I don't know if it feels a little bit like a two sides of the same coin. Does anybody have thoughts on that? Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. So I would agree with you for the most part. I think I 80% agree with you, because generally design systems are solving about 80% of problems, but in that still lie the 20% of problems where you still have to meet those quality levels. So while we are kind of like taking away 80% of the effort of that, in that 20% where you are delivering unique experiences or particularly catered experiences, you still have to meet those bars. So that knowledge is still prerequisite for a lot of those things.
Yeah, that's fair. Other thoughts there?
Something I'm interested in with the introduction of AI too, because you don't have to learn design in order to produce design. It's that same type of question, right? It's like, well, I don't really need to know all the answers in order to get the thing that I want. And so to some degree, then it becomes about how much do you care about craft? How much do you care about what goes into the thing that you're outputting? And then how much do you care about being able to take it and make it really unique? Because I think if you don't know, you can produce high quality things that seem well crafted. I would argue that AI is not crafting things. Like craft to me feels like a human thing to do, or a human lever to pull.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I do kind of wonder, like, yeah, if we're not teaching designers and we're just giving them the answers based on like, could you make it a formula? I was talking about this the other day with somebody around like color. What if we had a rubric of this percentage of the screen is the max for how much like different colors we allow on the screen? You can measure for that. You could bake that into AI rules.
Yeah.
But what does that really do to the quality of how consumers are producing things? Are they able to make decisions? And do you actually limit the ceiling? Because they no longer can figure out how to get there themselves.
Yeah.
So I think to find and break a ceiling that goes beyond using rule sets, probably to some extent beyond using AI.
Yeah, I was thinking about how it is such a similar thing. And even the sort of like loss of the skills, like everything that I automate. We talked about this in the episode that Davey just co-hosted a couple back, where we talked about using AI to automate things. And one of the challenges that we acknowledged as a community is that if I automate something with AI, I no longer have to solve those problems on a regular basis, and I sort of lose the cognitive ability to do that work to a certain extent, you know. And in some cases, that's probably wonderful and welcome, but there's probably cases where people are automating things they shouldn't be automating yet, you know, probably as evidenced by this link about AI's craft that I'm assuming is floating around here. Derek, what's on your mind?
Yeah, just thinking more directly about the question here, like, does encoding lower the skill? I don't think it does, with the caveat that I think, you know, what we've talked about a lot today is like having the time to spend on craft. So ideally, if we are encoding enough into a system, it shouldn't actually lower the skill, but provide more time back to spend on craft if you take, you know, if you didn't encode that in. Obviously, that's a perfect scenario that doesn't happen, and it still puts a lot on, you know, the individual consumer and their desires to spend that time on craft versus shifting it and focusing on something else entirely that, you know, maybe on their roadmap or in their goals, things like that.
That's a great point, Derek. It's something that I think I've seen this a few times with our clients, where it's like, if we go in to help them systematize some things, knowing they're going to get some efficiency gains, we also try to go in with a plan for what we're going to do with that efficiency. Because if you don't, it just gets filled up with more crap. You know, it's like, just deliver more things, you know? So having a little bit of like foresight into like, okay, once we get this back, we are going to invest that extra time into something, right? Could be craft or quality, as you're suggesting. So that's great. Ilya, what's up?
I totally agree with Derek. I also, yes, and because when folks are surrounded by evidence of craft outcomes, their taste improves over time. And that's one that, you know, is hard to train. But if you can provide a high taste experience and environment for designers and non-designers around the team, that I think can help. I unfortunately have an assertion that more and more of us will believe, more and more people we work with will over time believe that craft is not a human thing. One interesting piece of some of these intelligence tools is they do give the ability to be multimodal two-way conversations. So it can be like, well, tell me more about this. And then the tool will educate you more.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I love this. The conversation's gone in some interesting directions here, folks. We've got just a couple minutes left. ToniAnn, do you want to have the closing word here? Like, where have you landed here?
I landed. They weren't quite
no
yet.
landing. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that last point also made me think about like how we're building a lot using AI tools and trying to also like give people the answer. Right? The point of AI is in a lot of these works speed. I mean, speed to prototype, speed to market. Let me fix things. But it kind of makes me think about how we can leverage these tools for education purposes. Like education was one of the ones in the survey that was lacking a little bit. It's the one that takes the most time, the most energy, the most mental energy too. Like you're dealing with people. How do you educate people? It's different to every person. And this is kind of where I'm wondering now, or like, what are the ways in which maybe education of more of these things is key, along with that connection and co-collaboration. So like design systems is never going to fully own craft, but I think with many answers, using like people can really help create a shared definition, make design systems at the forefront of that craft, or the floor, if that's where you're positioned, co-collaborate on the ceiling, get together, but then also like, how can we democratize more of our education? Time is hard.
It's a great transition because a couple of the folks in Ashley and Casey from Redwoods just published part 2 of this series they're doing on education and systems. So if you haven't checked out this work, it's really cool. Go click here and check this out. I mean, it's a perfect connection to what we're talking about this week. So ToniAnn, thanks for bringing this one. There's a lot here. I feel like we could dive deep into this for a long time. Appreciate all of you, your generosity with your experience too. Thanks for being here and facilitating with me. Redwoods is open. If you haven't checked that out yet, please consider that. All the stuff from the last episode is finally released. This took me 3 weeks, which is the longest it's taken me yet because I had a 2-week vacation in there. So, so please go check out the stuff from episode 75 with Cassie, a really fun episode as well. Lots of other interesting writings here from folks over in Redwoods and from the larger systems community. There is, of course, we mentioned this config. I am going to drop in here a link to a WhatsApp chat. Actually, if somebody from Redwoods could go to the Slack and grab that WhatsApp invite. For anybody who's going to config, we just spun up a WhatsApp group. So all the system nerds can be in one place and so connect and like maybe find space for dinners and cocktails and whatnot. So we'll drop that link right here in this little box for config. If you're looking for a new gig or you know someone who is, drop those over here. And then Donnie, we've got just a minute. Can you give us just the rundown on this event that you're hosting?
I sure can. Yeah. So Undefined is a new event that I'm hosting in New York. I actually know that I know Josh is going on there, but if anyone else is in New York for the 29th, which is the Monday after config, I'm hosting an event which is very much like the question now that I'm thinking about it. It's just live. It's a little bit more maybe fast paced. You'll be prompts on the screen. We'll be answering prompts. Some of the things will be you know, kind of things about our industry that are professional, and some things will be maybe silly that are about our industry. So I'm hoping to have a good time. There will be food if you want to be fed. So I know that sometimes that's a way to get people in there. But undefined.ds.house is the main site. There's a Luma link that should be in the Fig Jam also that goes direct in there. I would absolutely love to see you there. I'll have videographies to capture all of the great time for the first event. So if you're in New York in the time, and we'll probably talk about config too.
Amazing. Thanks, Donnie. Appreciate that. I love all the stuff that you're doing for the community too, man. Keep it up. All right, folks, we are at the end of our time. Thanks you so much for being here. Appreciate all of your time, all of your kindness and generosity with your knowledge. ToniAnn, you rock. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Question. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective in your design system efforts, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's more information about my coaching and consulting offerings over on the site. And if you need a hand building a sustainable design system program, my studio Sparkbox is standing by, ready to partner. Hiring Sparkbox is an investment in your design system and your team. Reach out and let's see if there's a good fit. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.